Imagine a world where every single word you read on a screen costs you a coin. You wake up, you search for an answer to a simple question, and a meter starts running, draining your bank account second by second. In this chilling alternate reality, a single, faceless corporation owns the absolute rights to all human knowledge. They track every thought you explore, every message you send, and every piece of data you consume, holding the modern world hostage behind an unbreakable paywall. This is not some distant, impossible nightmare. It is exactly the trap humanity was walking blindly into just a few decades ago. The foundation of our daily lives was on the verge of being locked down, monetized, and controlled by powerful entities waiting in the shadows. The freedom we take for granted today was almost stolen before it even existed, nearly plunging us into a digital dark age where only the wealthy could afford to learn, connect, or speak out. That terrifying vision of a completely controlled network was the natural trajectory of early technology. To understand how close we came to that grim fate, you have to look back at the bleak reality of computers before the World Wide Web. These machines were not the glowing portals to the universe we know now. They were lonely, isolated islands of metal and glass. Each computer was a locked digital vault, completely cut off from the rest of the world, holding information that was stubbornly trapped inside. If you wanted to share a simple document with someone in another building, let alone another country, the process was agonizingly broken. You could not just send a link, you had to copy files onto physical disks, carry them by hand, and hope the other person had the exact same type of machine and software to open them. It was a fractured, silent landscape where brilliant minds were walled off from one another, unable to combine their knowledge. This deep isolation meant that human progress was moving at a suffocatingly slow crawl. Now, feel the dread of what the corporate world saw when they looked at these disconnected machines. They did not see a chance to unite humanity. They saw the ultimate real estate grab. Massive telecommunications companies and greedy software giants were already drawing up the blueprints to build tall, impenetrable walls around the flow of data. They were preparing to install digital toll booths on every wire and connection they could lay their hands on. If they succeeded, they would dictate who was allowed to speak and who was forced to listen. The future of human connection was about to be carved up and sold to the highest bidder. It was a looming disaster, a silent takeover that the general public was completely unaware of. The human mystery at the center of this dark saga unfolds in the massive, deafening laboratories of CERN in Switzerland. This facility was built to smash atoms and uncover the secrets of the universe, filled with thousands of the most aggressive, competitive scientists on Earth. Yet the man who would alter the course of human history was not one of the loud physicists chasing a Nobel Prize. His name was Tim Berners-Lee, a quiet, unassuming software engineer hidden away in the background. The contrast is unsettling. While the world's brightest minds were focused on the violent collisions of particles, Tim was staring at the silent, frustrating walls between their computers. He watched as brilliant researchers lost months of work simply because they could not access a file on a machine just down the hall. He felt the heavy weight of all that trapped potential, a silent tragedy of lost knowledge that was happening every single day. In the shadows of those massive particle accelerators, he decided to map out a way to tear down those invisible walls. He did not set out to build a business. He began writing a new kind of code, forging a tool that was meant to be entirely invisible. This was not a boring piece of technical software. It was a secret language, a universal translator designed to let any computer on Earth speak to any other computer, regardless of who built it or who owned it. He was carefully cutting the teeth of a master key. Piece by piece, he constructed the three pillars of this new reality. He created the language to format documents, the system to link them together, and the software to actually view them. He was building the World Wide Web, but this master key was dangerously powerful. It had the potential to unlock every single digital vault on the planet, creating a web of shared knowledge that no corporation could ever hope to contain. With that invisible master key of hypertext and routing protocols finally forged deep within the quiet subterranean labs of CERN in late 1990, a new and chilling reality began to take shape. The theoretical framework of shared data was no longer just an academic experiment, but a fully operational architecture. Tim Berners-Lee sat alone in the harsh glow of his next computer monitor, staring intently at the raw foundational code he had just brought to life. It was no longer just a clever way for high-energy physicists to share experimental notes. He was looking at a living, breathing network infrastructure that possessed the terrifying capability to connect every single computer, every private thought, and every archived piece of data on Earth. The sheer, unprecedented scale of what he had successfully engineered was deeply unsettling. Whoever held the administrative keys to this centralized routing system would possess the ultimate choke point for all human knowledge. It was a tool of almost unimaginable power, mechanically capable of controlling exactly who was allowed to speak, who was authorized to listen, and what the entire connected world was permitted to know. Realizing the massive, existential danger embedded within the very architecture of this creation, the creator understood that the system was incredibly vulnerable to corporate capture. The crushing weight of the entire digital future suddenly rested squarely on his shoulders, forcing a lone programmer to act as the sole guardian against forces that sought to enclose and monetize the digital frontier. The atmosphere around him rapidly grew tense and heavy with corporate expectation. In the early 1990s, the global computing industry was a notoriously ruthless landscape dominated by proprietary software and closed ecosystems. It was a fiercely competitive environment where every revolutionary new idea was immediately locked down by aggressive legal teams, boxed up behind strict copyright walls, and sold to the absolute highest bidder. The external pressure to legally patent the underlying protocols of the World Wide Web was entirely suffocating. Institutional lawyers, multinational corporations, and aggressive industry leaders all operated on the exact same cold logic of profit, demanding that he officially claim ownership of this vast new digital territory before a rival entity did. He essentially held the sole property deed to the communication infrastructure of humanity, and the entire financial world was waiting to see exactly what his asking price would be. But giving in to that intense mounting pressure to sell the foundational source code would have instantly triggered a catastrophic chain reaction across the global telecommunications grid. It was a choice that carried devastating long-term consequences for every single person, business, and institution that ever attempted to log on to the emerging network. If a telecommunications corporation had successfully purchased the exclusive intellectual property rights to the web, the internet as we know it today would have immediately become a massive, inescapable financial trap. Every single website created would require a costly paid commercial license just to exist, effectively turning the open, global exchange of ideas into an exclusive, highly restricted luxury reserved strictly for those who could afford the steep entry fee. A single corporate owner sitting at the top of this hierarchy would have possessed the absolute, unchecked authority to meticulously track every word you read, intercept every private message you sent, and log every search you ever made. They could easily charge a daily digital tax on your fundamental right to access basic public information, transforming human curiosity into a tightly monitored, surveillance-heavy, and endlessly profitable toll road. Staring down the incredibly dark dystopian reality of this patented digital prison, the lone creator faced a monumental, life-altering crossroads. The decision he made in those crucial months would dictate the structural foundation of modern society, forcing him to choose between unprecedented personal wealth and the preservation of a free, open society. It remains one of the greatest, most profound psychological mysteries of modern technological history. Tim Berners-Lee held the undisputed legal right to become the richest man who ever lived, positioning himself as the absolute, unquestioned ruler over a sprawling digital empire that would soon touch every physical corner of the globe and generate trillions of dollars in global commerce. He could have incredibly easily justified taking the massive corporate payouts, permanently securing his historical legacy and his family fortune, while the rest of the connected world paid the daily price of admission. The immense psychological weight of deliberately walking away from ultimate systemic power and unimaginable financial wealth is a burden that very few human beings in recorded history could ever endure. Yet, completely defying every basic human instinct of greed and shattering every standard corporate expectation of the era, he made a final binding legal decision that shocked the established technology world to its absolute core. He drafted a simple document that would permanently alter the trajectory of human communication. Sitting in that quiet, shadowed office on April 30th, 1993, he officially released the source code into the public domain, royalty-free, effectively choosing you over endless personal riches. He looked at the vast, untapped potential of the newly connected world and definitively decided that absolute information freedom was far more important than building a private, heavily guarded empire of control. Sitting inside his unassuming office in Building 31 at CERN, Tim Berners-Lee made a calculated choice that directly shaped the daily existence of every person listening right now. He looked at a future where he could easily become a digital king, holding the exclusive patent keys to all human knowledge, and he walked away. He chose the public over endless personal wealth. He chose the open, free exchange of human thought over building a proprietary digital empire that would have taxed every single click, every database search, and every network connection. That incomprehensible financial sacrifice set the stage for the most profound release of communication power in modern history. Inside the brutalist concrete walls of the European Organization for Nuclear Research, administrators quietly signed a formal declaration that officially placed the World Wide Web software squarely into the public domain. That mundane stack of administrative paper was actually a massive, silent explosion detonating across the globe. By permanently signing away the intellectual property rights and the foundational source code, those directors ensured that no single person, no multinational corporation, and no sovereign government could ever own the core architecture of the web. It was an irrevocable legal gift to humanity, permanently locking the door against any entity who might try to claim proprietary ownership later. With the foundational code forever legally free from corporate control and licensing restrictions, the initial digital spark was finally allowed to catch the wind. Independent programmers, university researchers, and amateur technologists immediately began downloading the open software, installing it on their own machines without needing to ask for corporate permission or pay royalty fees. Almost overnight, the open web spread like a wild, beautiful fire across the planet, expanding from just 50 known web servers in early 1993 to over 100,000 by 1996. Universities, isolated research scientists, and everyday dreamers began setting up their own independent servers, linking their personal computers together in a chaotic, brilliant network of shared ideas. There was no central internet authority to ask for permission, no corporate toll booth to pass through, and no institutional gatekeeper to deny anyone access. As this global network exploded in physical size and user volume, a chilling realization crept into the boardrooms of the world's most powerful telecommunications monopolies. Massive legacy corporations who had spent decades controlling the global flow of information and charging exorbitant fees by the minute for long-distance data suddenly realized they had been completely bypassed. A free, uncontrollable digital network was rapidly growing right beneath their vast copper wire infrastructure, and they were utterly powerless to stop its decentralized expansion. This unchecked decentralized expansion birthed a brief, shining era of digital independence throughout the late 1990s that we will likely never see again. It was a fleeting window of time where the internet operated exactly as its creator intended, completely devoid of the massive commercial surveillance engines that define our current online existence. Those early days were the golden age of the free web, a digital frontier defined by raw, unfiltered human connection and hand-coded HTML pages. People built strange, wonderful, highly personal websites on hosts like GeoCities simply to share their niche passions with strangers halfway across the world. It was a time of pure, unmonetized exploration where you could wander through the digital landscape without being quietly watched, aggressively tracked, or psychologically manipulated by invisible engagement algorithms. Looking back at those archived pages, there is a deep, haunting sadness to that fragile technological innocence. The millions of people logging on through screeching dial-up modems in those days had no idea that they were walking through a collaborative public garden that would very soon be paved over. They genuinely believed this absolute, unmediated freedom was the permanent new reality, completely unaware of the massive venture capital forces gathering just outside their peripheral view. But absolute freedom is an economic void that centralized power and massive capital investments always rush to fill. The newly minted massive tech companies of the early 2000s realized a terrifying economic truth. They could never actually own the underlying foundation of the web because Berners-Lee had permanently given the protocols away. So, Silicon Valley devised a brilliant, highly lucrative new strategy to seize control of the user experience without ever having to rewrite or purchase the core underlying code. If they could not legally own the digital land, they would simply build huge, shiny fences on top of the free world. Step by step, they created massive, walled social media platforms and search monopolies, luring people inside with unprecedented convenience, free storage, and slick interface design. Slowly, the wild open frontier was systematically replaced by corporate-owned digital shopping malls where every single keystroke, mouse movement, and private message was quietly monitored, packaged, and sold to advertisers. The commercial trap was set perfectly, deliberately turning the greatest tool of human freedom ever invented into an invisible, highly profitable surveillance cage. The open protocols remained technically free beneath the surface, but the actual human experience of the Internet was now entirely dictated by a handful of untouchable trillion-dollar corporations. When Tim Berners-Lee handed his master key to the world on April 30th, 1993, he unlocked a digital door that could never be closed again. But one chilling question lingers over his unprecedented gift of the World Wide Web. Did the visionary computer scientist foresee the darkness that such absolute, unregulated freedom would inevitably unleash across global networks? The open web was explicitly designed for unfiltered human connection, envisioned as a decentralized sanctuary where academic knowledge flowed without institutional barriers. Yet this very lack of centralized control gave rise to a terrifying dual nature. The exact same invisible fiber optic roads that carried messages of hope also created perfect, unmonitored highways for humanity's darkest impulses to spread. That absolute, unregulated freedom soon became the perfect hunting ground for a new breed of corporate predator. These early tech pioneers quickly realized exactly how much unprecedented financial power could be gained by systematically watching, recording, and monetizing our every digital move. Look closely at the screen in front of you right now, whether it is a smartphone or a computer monitor. Beneath the glowing glass, the original foundation of the free web is still there, silently carrying trillions of bytes of data. But the highly curated landscape you're looking at is no longer the wild, open frontier it was meant to be. Instead, you are completely surrounded by invisible surveillance traps built directly into the code. You're moving through a sophisticated maze of closed applications and silent algorithms that watch, record, and analyze every single tap, swipe, and pause of your finger. The autonomy you feel as you scroll is nothing more than a carefully constructed psychological illusion. This modern illusion of digital freedom deliberately hides a massive trillion-dollar machine operating just beneath the surface. It is a highly engineered system of behavioral tracking designed specifically to turn your daily life, your private conversations, and your personal preferences into a highly profitable consumer product. Modern technology giants took the free public roads that were painstakingly built for all of humanity and set up invisible toll booths at every digital intersection. They do not charge you physical currency to pass through their proprietary gates. Instead, they demand something far more valuable and finite, which is your constant, undivided psychological attention. They use the underlying architecture of the open web to quietly harvest your most personal data, relentlessly tracking your deepest fears, your secret desires, and your daily habits. This staggering volume of information is then fed into massive server farms that deliver hyper-targeted advertisements and subtly manipulate your emotions, keeping you locked onto their platforms for as many hours as possible. This invisible, continuous extraction of human attention completely transformed the fundamental nature of the internet. Over the span of just 2 decades, it mutated from a collaborative global public library into a heavily guarded psychological trap engineered by behavioral scientists to exploit the vulnerable dopamine receptors in our brains. It is a profound and shocking betrayal of the original open source promise made in 1993. Without even realizing the true cost of the transaction, we willingly traded the wild, free feel, feel, They did not even have to purchase the underlying foundation from its creators, because they simply built massive, inescapable commercial walls right on top of the free protocols, effectively trapping billions of daily users inside their private empires. This shocking systematic betrayal of the open web has left a deep, lingering scar on the very fabric of our modern society. The consequences of this silent corporate takeover extend far beyond our browser windows, actively reshaping global political landscapes, altering democratic elections, and fundamentally changing how human beings perceive absolute truth. There is a profound, undeniable sadness hanging over this hijacked digital landscape. The original vision formulated at the European Organization for Nuclear Research was a pure, noble quest to create a collaborative tool that would permanently uplift humanity and share vital knowledge across the globe. It was never meant to be weaponized into a system used to divide populations with angry algorithms and polarized echo chambers. The ultimate human cost of this lost utopian vision is truly chilling to witness in real time. We are currently more connected to our glowing screens than at any other point in human history. Yet we are increasingly isolated from each other, trapped in artificial digital spaces that were deliberately designed by engineers to spark profitable outrage rather than foster genuine human understanding. The crushing reality of this hijacked network is measured in the silent isolation of millions, trapped in digital spaces designed to divide rather than unite. Psychologists now track unprecedented spikes in global anxiety and polarization directly linked to algorithmic feeds, proving that the architecture of modern social platforms thrives on fracturing human empathy to maximize daily engagement metrics. Yet deep within the shadows of these modern tech monopolies, a quiet rebellion is gathering force. The very same pioneers who gave the world its ultimate freedom are returning to the battlefield to reclaim it. Tim Berners-Lee, horrified by the massive surveillance monster his creation has been forced to become, is now writing new decentralized code to smash the walled garden. These hidden architects are desperately constructing alternate networks where human beings actually own their personal data, utilizing encrypted storage pods to strip away the power of corporate surveillance. It is a grueling uphill war fought in the dark corners of the internet, a final attempt to break the chains of digital extraction before behavioral profiling becomes a permanent fixture of modern existence. This invisible struggle to decentralize the web is the only real defense left against total corporate control. If the underlying infrastructure remains concentrated in massive server farms owned by just three major tech conglomerates, every keystroke and private message will continue to be processed through a central choke point, rendering true digital privacy completely obsolete. But a haunting question lingers over this fight, casting a long shadow over the future of human connection. Can we ever truly return to the innocent, open fields of 1989 when the first proposal was drafted on a single Next computer? Or has the damage of surveillance capitalism already been permanently woven into the psychological fabric of our society? There is a chilling possibility that human nature itself is simply destined to build walls, hoard power, and watch its neighbors. We are forced to wonder if absolute freedom was always just a temporary illusion, doomed to be swallowed by our darkest instincts for control, as soon as corporations realized they could harvest terabytes of our personal habits for unprecedented profit. The answer to that grim mystery will ultimately dictate whether the internet remains a tool for human progress or becomes an instrument of absolute oppression. As authoritarian regimes increasingly deploy biometric tracking, predictive policing algorithms, and social credit systems, the original decentralized network is rapidly being weaponized into the most efficient control mechanism in human history. You are standing at the absolute center of this invisible war zone. Every single time you open a browser, every time you click a link, and every time a hidden tracking pixel loads on your screen, your attention and your choices become the contested territory in a multi-billion-dollar bidding war for your psychological profile. When you step outside the comfortable algorithm-driven feeds, and when you take active steps to guard your own private information using encrypted messaging and open-source browsers, you're fighting for that original spark of freedom. The screen in front of you is not just a piece of glass, but the active front line in a desperate ongoing struggle for the human mind. Reclaiming your independence from these digital empires is the only way to keep the original vision of the web alive. The foundational concept of a peer-to-peer network, where information flows freely between equal nodes without a corporate intermediary analyzing the exchange, depends entirely on users willing to reject the convenience of centralized platforms. To understand the stakes, you only have to look back at the chilling alternate reality that was narrowly avoided decades ago. Imagine the absolute terror of a world where Tim Berners-Lee had chosen wealth over humanity, locking his master key behind strict patents, aggressive copyright lawsuits, and exclusive corporate ownership, before the network ever had a chance to breathe in that timeline. Every digital interaction you have ever made would have a toll booth, monitored and controlled by a single, untouchable authority from the very beginning. We would be living under a complete digital dictatorship, where sending an email, reading a medical journal, or accessing basic public knowledge was a luxury reserved only for those who could afford to pay the gatekeeper. That terrifying path was erased by a single act of radical generosity on April 30th, 1993, when the core protocols were permanently surrendered to the public domain. That unprecedented refusal to monetize the foundation of global communication left us with a flawed but fighting chance at maintaining our intellectual freedom. The journey of this code is one of the most profound mysteries of modern history, starting as a quiet whisper in a Swiss laboratory before exploding into a global revolution. From that simple, unpatented idea to the complex, heavily monitored reality of billions of connected devices we navigate today. The underlying code remains a fragile thread connecting the entire human race. The journey of that original code is nothing short of a miracle. It began in a quiet, isolated lab at CERN, existing only as a fragile idea on a single computer, before exploding into a global web of shared human knowledge. Today, that same foundational code is locked in a fierce, silent struggle against invisible surveillance and corporate control. Yet, despite the massive digital fortresses built on top of it, the absolute core of the internet remains fundamentally free, a silent testament to a choice made decades ago. That single decision permanently altered the legal landscape of human communication by releasing the World Wide Web into the public domain on April 30th, 1993. A legal precedent was set that no single corporation could ever own the underlying framework of our digital lives. This institutional surrender of intellectual property rights ensured that the basic building blocks of the internet would always belong to everyone. It created a permanent, legally binding reality where the essential infrastructure of global connection cannot be bought, sold, or locked away behind a patent. But this gift came with a heavy, often unseen burden for the everyday people who now live their lives online. Families and communities were thrust into a digital frontier that was entirely unregulated, forced to navigate a landscape where their personal data became the new currency. The aftermath left millions of users vulnerable to the very forces the open web was meant to bypass. We became the product, our attention and private moments silently harvested by the tech giants who built their massive empires on top of the free foundation we were given. This rapid commercialization triggered a massive cultural aftershock that redefined how we view privacy. In the early 2000s, the assumption that the internet was a safe, anonymous space was completely shattered by the rise of data mining algorithms. A specific turning point occurred as social media platforms began tracking every click, search, and interaction, permanently changing the public expectation of digital anonymity. The utopian vision of a free, unmonitored digital commons was quietly replaced by the chilling reality of a global surveillance economy. As we look at the vast, fractured landscape of the modern web, a deeply unsettling question remains completely unanswered. We still do not know if a truly decentralized, user-controlled internet can ever be reclaimed from the massive tech monopolies that currently dominate it. The public record cannot settle whether the original, pure vision of the web is completely dead, or if it simply lies dormant beneath layers of corporate code. There is no clear evidence to prove if the damage done to our digital privacy is permanent, or if a new generation of developers can somehow break the chains. Ultimately, the most profound consequence of this history is the ongoing global legislative battle over net neutrality. Governments around the world are now forced to constantly legislate and regulate network providers just to maintain the basic fairness that was originally baked into the system. This endless legal tug of war is the permanent reality of a system built on open ideals but operated by profit-driven corporations. The concrete implication is that the freedom of the internet is no longer guaranteed by its code, but must be desperately defended in courtrooms and parliament buildings every single day. We are left looking at a glowing screen, a portal built on a monumental act of generosity, now shadowed by the very greed it tried to escape.